From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined, as always, with our super producer, Dylan, the Tennessee pal Fagan. Most importantly, you are here. That makes this the stuff they don't want you to know. Guys, I was thinking today we start with the idea of a journey. So if any of us are comfortable answering, what's the strangest, most dangerous trip you've taken?
I don't think I've taken anything currently that I would consider super strange or dangerous, but I've got one coming up, going to the Middle East for the first time in my life. That would definitely be the most far afield location with kind of a culture that I'm very, very much inexperienced with. So that'll probably be it.
I had a little bit of a weird thing when exploring the west of the United States, where it's a little less hospitable than a lot of other places, just out there by the that we visited out by the big old dam.
Oh, yeah.
I've been out there before, and just exploring on your own can be hazardous to your health.
Sure. Yeah. The wild is alive, and human beings are passengers in the wild of the globe. For some people, especially thrill seekers, when you're hearing that question, your answer might be something like cave diving, which is a crazy idea. I don't know why people do it for fun, but be safe. Or we talked previously on other episodes about things like dark tourism. Dark tourism is where you will purposely travel to potentially deadly areas like collapsed states, war zones, contaminated land. Think of, Chernobyl, for instance. But for millions of people, year over year, as we record this evening, the most dangerous trip of their lives is not consensual. They're not seeking thrills. No one's trying to base jump or anything like that. They are fighting instead to survive. So in this series, we're exploring one of these areas. It's a largely lawless place where tens of thousands of people are risking their lives on a daily basis. It's a home to horror, desperation, and ambition. This is the story of the Darien Gap. Here are the facts. Okay, maybe when we talk about what the Darien Gap is, maybe we contextualize it a little bit. This may be familiar to some of our car stuff listeners. You guys know about the Great Pan American Highway, right?
Yeah, that thing's incredible. Incredible. When it was first created, wasn't it starting in South America, moving north, essentially?
Yeah. It's depending upon whom you ask, it is a roughly 19,000 mile network of roads. Like you said, Matt, starting down south in Argentina, going all the way up to Alaska. The reason we say depending upon whom you ask is because despite the length of this road, generally considered to be the longest road in the entirety of the planet, Uncle Sam does not officially acknowledge the highway. So if you ask the U.S. government officially, they'll tell you it starts in Mexico, right on the border, and then it goes down to Argentina. But if you ask people who drive on the road, they'll say, nah, it goes all the way up to Alaska. A rose is a rose is a rose, despite what names we may give it.
Well, yeah, let's give that distinction, just because if you're looking at some of the early maps, especially, they will say things like, here are all of the Pan American Highway connections that span through Central America, or the ones that span through South America,
Sure.
Or here are the highways that span, from Alaska through Canada to the U.S. And I think it is those connections that are not within the U.S. that end up being like, I don't know, the things that the officials go, I don't know.
Yeah, they're saying, look, everybody has roads. All right. It's a very weird policy thing, and policy can be hilarious. Policy can be helpful. Policy can also be dangerous. We're going to take the global attitude here and confirm that the Pan American Highway is again the longest contiguous road on the planet, or network of roads and connections. Right. There is only one break in this great human endeavor. It is a region of dense rainforest and unforgiving mountains, an isthmus between they're connecting Panama and Colombia. This is known as the Darien Gap.
Right. And every now and again, somebody pitches an idea, some sort of plan to fix this inhospitable area and this gap in the highway system. In 1964, 50 years after the Panama Canal first opened, some, oddball, wild card, mavericky types in the U.S. and Panama talked about using 325 nuclear explosions, to blast a 60-mile trench through the territory. That sounds like a great plan, guys. I don't know about you. Couldn't possibly be any unforeseen after effects.
There's some real brainstorm energy there.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed. It's 4:30 on a Friday and someone says, you know what's better than one canal, you guys? What about two? And then
let's blow up the moon while we're at it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's a crazy idea. Nuke a jungle, essentially, or rainforest.
Mm-hmm.
Like what?
Yeah, to build the canal. And if you go back to the New York Times, which has an excellent contemporary archive of these kind of moments in history, there's an article arguing for this, and they're essentially saying this plan is fine, because it's still, the sort of halcyon age of an atomic future. And they said, it'll be okay because the region is, quote, there's a quote from the article, sparsely populated. And there's an implication here, shout out Dennis Reynolds, which was something like, I mean, I guess there are people there, but
are they really people? I mean,
do they really matter?
Yeah.
Do they really matter? Do they have a subscription to NYT?
Yeah, that is the question. Wow, that is very out of character for the New York Times, but I guess it was a different New York Time.
Super cool.
And just to be clear, this would be a 60-mile trench to connect the highways, even though after the Panama Canal has been built, and all of the rigmarole that went into doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I love the word rigmarole. Same. So now we could get rid of the natural world, and maybe we can just build a big bridge. We got to be honest, folks. For outsiders, this place, the Gap, is terrifying. Pull up your map of choice and check it out. It is a geographic choke point. It narrowly separates the Caribbean Sea from the Pacific Ocean. And even without the involvement of the Pan American Highway, which is sort of an entry point for this conversation and this exploration, the Darien Gap would still be one of the most inhospitable regions of the planet. The temperatures are crazy. The biodiversity is such that there's still wild animals that can get you. There are mountains. Imagine an unpleasant thing when you think of the word deep forest or jungle. It's there. It's definitely there.
Yeah, and it is huge too. It's I don't know, the way it's described sometimes on paper, it doesn't seem like it's that much land, but
sure,
it is vast, especially if you look at it from above on a map. Though the maps available to U.S. citizens, it appears at least, are not very high quality.
Not super great. You will do some digging here, so don't rely on Google Maps for this one. Go to places like latitude.to or go to your satellite observer of choice, and you'll see something that's a little less, dare I say, sanitized, or a little more in detail. And look, we got to be fair. People have been living in this patch of the planet since antiquity. And we've got a few funny stories or tragic stories about this. They're kind of like ridiculous history. In the days of colonial expansion, European forces, were figuring out the shape of the world, and they thought, hey, look at this little isthmus, this little connector. The term would be a saddle, a continental saddle. And they said, this is going to be a great place to settle. This is the Park Place on our global monopoly board. It's nestled between the continents. We can get to one place more easily. And then we can maybe in the future, we can control transit and commerce through this land-based checkpoint. And so the Spanish founded Santa Maria la Antigua del Darien in 1510, which makes it one of the first European settlements on the American mainland. The Vikings beat them, candidly, but for the Spaniards, this was a big thing, and I think, as we're alluding to, they quickly learned that they quickly learned what anybody learns when they're trying to buy a house, right? A location on paper can look good, but it often doesn't give you the full sense of a place in practice. And it didn't take long for people in this new community to start leaving the town, because it was really rough there. There was a lot of disease. There were animal attacks. The locals didn't like them, and that's partially the fault of the Spanish, if we're being honest. We were talking a little bit off air. Some of the folks who left this settlement from 1510, they went on to found what we call Panama City today.
And eventually, that settlement, Santa Maria, was completely abandoned.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, basically given back to both indigenous peoples that were already hanging out there and the wild. But a lot of those folks, when they left, we were talking about Panama City, that's not that far, basically northwest, kind of wrapping around a little bit to get to the area where Panama City was founded. And that place just sprung up into a place even now when you go to, it's a center of civilization. It's where you hang out when you go to Panama. And it's beautiful. It's amazing. But it's just crazy to think back in, 1510, then just a couple of years afterwards, they said, we're getting out of here.
Ooh, and they are not the only Europeans to roll snake eyes on the dice of expansion here. I think that works. Snake eyes is bad in gambling.
I think
sometimes.
Right. Yeah. There's also
it depends on the game.
It's a gambling heist movie starring Nicolas Cage and Gary Sinise as well.
Okay, that's good.
If you roll snake eyes, I think it's typically not good, depending on the game. In craps, I don't know, guys. I'm terrible.
I still don't understand craps. I don't understand gambling. But there is one more thing we have to mention, which we may explore in depth in a future Ridiculous History episode. Scotland. It sounds out of the blue. It's a true story. We beat me here, Dylan. We shit thee not, fellow conspiracy realists. The Darien Gap is part of why Scotland is no longer independent, which I think a lot of us didn't see that coming.
Like they expended too many resources trying to do stuff there?
100%. And I like that we're talking about resources there, Matt, because we're going to explore kind of a resource allocation.
Hey guys, why don't we take a quick pause for a word from our sponsor and then jump back across the gap, mind the gap? We'll be right back.
And we've returned. Let's jump back into the story.
Okay, so the Spanish try, it doesn't work. They make Panama City, or they found Panama City, which does work. Fast forward, 1698, Scottish forces make a trading colony in the Gap, and it's part of something they call the Darien Venture. This is often described as the most ambitious colonial scheme attempted in all of the 17th century. Like you were saying, they spent bundles of money on it. I was going to say boodles, but I don't think boodles is a word in this language.
And theoretically, this would be a trading post of sorts, or a place to gain resources from this area, then use ships to get it back to Scottish mainland?
Yes. Just so, and they originally entered into this with a collaborative mindset. It was like a mixtape or a posse track. However, their partners pulled out, and Scotland was continually pumping money, resources, blood, treasure into this. More and more Scottish colonists died from disease, attacks from rival Spanish forces. Obviously, the indigenous communities weren't vibing with them. Eventually, they had to give up their expansionist ambitions. In total, we understand they sent 16 ships in like 3 waves. At the end of the game, only 1 ship was able to return to Scotland. This was such a disaster that it frankly shipwrecked the Scottish economy overall, and less than they were foobar.
Was it because they got attacked, or like they just couldn't maintain the ships in the area?
It was just it was just too inhospitable for them, right? They just weren't prepared for the conditions that they met.
Yeah, and transit lines or lines of communication are different there, so they're getting news very, very late, if at all, and they kept throwing money at the problem, sort of like someone with a gambling problem.
Well, it's kind of like how the colonies didn't work out so great for the British Empire.
Yeah, take that, guys.
Yeah, well, you can't. It's hard to govern from afar, in those days especially.
Mm-hmm. And so, less than 10 years after this disastrous, ambitious attempt, the financial consequences of this endeavor are part of what led Scotland to sign the Treaty of Union, which leads to another related allegation of conspiracy. We know that Scotland is part of the United Kingdom today. And guys, do you remember it wasn't that long ago when a lot of our fellow Scottish conspiracy realists were writing to us and saying the recent referendum for Scottish independence was rigged?
Ooh, yeah. But I don't have the details there, not at least at hand.
Nor I.
All right, we'll write to the king. Just
Good
someone
call.
text him.
I got his email.
Yeah. What's he doing? I'm sure he's not busy.
It's the King of England at yahoo.com.
Yes. Throughout this entire time, before the age of colonial expansion, after it, and even now in modern evenings, Indigenous people have lived in this area we call the Darien Gap, and they watch outsiders come and go and time again fail to tame this untamable wilderness. Pretty much every outside exploratory force, including would-be colonizers, they die of all the stuff you would be familiar with if you ever played Oregon Trail. Disease,
dysentery.
hunger, thirst, dysentery, right? Animal attacks, they drown, or often they simply disappear somewhere out there in the green.
And speaking of the indigenous tribes that hung out in that region, 2 in particular had the best claims to the land, the Gunna and Embera Unana people.
Yeah. And we want to give space to the indigenous communities there. They were, again, there far before the Europeans and far before the conversations we're having now. But they, like any other indigenous groups, they're facing tremendous challenges from the outside world in the modern day, particularly disease, corruption, and crime. Because the Darien Gap, we've described it as, it sounds like a terrible piece of real estate, right? From what we've heard so far, it is a necessity for thousands and thousands of people to visit. And that's because if you are forced to move overland from South to Central America and all points north, this is the only way to get through. This is the only land passage.
Yep. And even the waters around this area, so you may be thinking, oh, okay, you can't get through on the land. We'll just take a boat around this area and we'll make it to Panama somewhere, or maybe all the way to Costa Rica, which is, just on the other side. No, because those waters are fully controlled by a lot of the same human beings that are controlling the land.
Yes, and they have a vested interest in determining how you fit into their portfolio of profit. How's that for diplomacy?
There you go.
Yeah, okay. We're going to look at what makes this area so dangerous in detail in just a bit. But if you are like us, if you live in the United States, one of your first questions may plausibly be something like, well, hot dang, guys, we sent humans to outer space. We invented Velcro and automobiles. You know what I mean? What's another cool invention?
Tupperware.
Tupperware, yeah. Mods, synthesizers. Why can't civilization, with all these innovations, build one measly stretch of road here? As we'll find, it's a great question, but the answer is kind of complex.
Oh, yeah, we built nukes. Maybe we could use some of those.
Maybe we should just nuke every problem.
I think that's a good call.
All right. Our next sponsor is Dirty Bombs.
Well, these are important questions, and they have important and complex answers. There are a ton of people and communities who are completely against the idea of connecting the highway through the Darien Gap. Indigenous groups on both sides of the Panamanian-Colombian border are against this kind of construction for obvious reasons, as are associated governments and activist groups. And, of course, criminals, being that this would be a pretty solid area to hide away and do, crimes.
Yeah. And there are reasons for, so already we see there are multiple, like corporate America would call stakeholders. Their reasoning against completing this stretch of highway, it's pretty valid. The critics of construction are going to cite things like protecting the rainforest. The biodiversity in this little patch is amazing, and especially given these current times when the larger rainforest, the Brazilian rainforest, the Amazon, is under such immediate, clear, and present threat. You want to save what you can, and their argument is that construction is going to inevitably lead to intense deforestation. It's going to endanger native wildlife, right? And in some cases, this is the primary place where these life forms reside. And they say, once damage is done, there's not political will to fix it.
Well, once any type of road, well, let's just imagine a road is built there, any type of road, even if it's a 2-lane highway, right? One road going west, one road going east. And once you put that in there, what pops up? What else pops up along that road? People need to get water. People need to get food,
Fuel.
right? They're going to be entrepreneurial human beings that decide, hey, well, we're going to figure out how to do this, even if it's not sanctioned legally, right, in the area. Because we know that's already happening now, even without a road.
Yeah, to paraphrase Jurassic Park, profit finds a way. And yeah, this gets us to the other thing. There's a real concern about the spread of disease. And at first, I'll be honest, I don't know about you guys, but at first I thought this was propaganda until I looked into it. The idea that one could use the gap as a natural barrier against the spread of various tropical diseases sounds a little politically convenient, but also it turns out foot and mouth disease is a huge deal, despite the kind of silly name.
And this did and could continue to protect livestock, from getting afflicted with this disease, which can be devastating.
That is a big deal. It does, protecting livestock makes sense, right?
Sure.
But then trying to use this gap as a stopgap against human-borne diseases, that doesn't make much sense to me because, planes.
Boats.
Yeah.
There are a couple of other choices, right?
Yeah.
It's a pickle. It's a bag of badgers for sure. We will note that neither Central America or North America entire have had a significant breakout of the viral disease known as foot and mouth disease since 1954. The third thing, another very valid point, is, hey, let's try to protect the lives and existence of indigenous communities. And you don't have to look far. You don't have to look far at all to find the terrifying consequences of the modern world intruding upon the livelihood of an indigenous group.
Yeah, deforestation, expansion of infrastructure. Often, the folks that were there first are the ones that kind of end up holding the bag.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason why I love the example of just building a simple 2-lane road, right? That will still bring with it knock-on consequences that are often not clear to the public until it's too late to turn back.
And it's a slippery slope, right? Because it would be like a single motel gets built, right? And then, well, then we need a supply stop. Oh, well, now we need a gas station. No, now, and it just becomes.
Yeah. If you give a mouse a cookie is a great parable for that kind of thing, right? And this is the last one, just for some levity, because we'll need it as our journey continues. I had to laugh at this. Some of the governments in the area, Panama, Colombia, some Caribbean nations as well, and of course our buddy Uncle Sam from earlier, they say you can't build the road because you're preventing drug trafficking. You know who agrees with not building the road? The drug cartels that run the Darien Gap.
Wait, so they're saying you can't build the road because the gap is preventing trafficking?
Yeah, right? You know what I mean?
I don't know about that, guys.
I think it's laughable and it's crazy. I just want to commend the comedy chops of people who are able to say that in public with a straight face. Yeah. You know what I mean? You have a future in improv.
I mean, it's an absolute haven for drug traffickers. Like I was saying earlier, it's like the perfect location to hide away, from prying eyes, doing drug manufacturing and distribution.
Prying eyes, watching you.
I will devil's advocate just enough to say a highway would make it easier, maybe, especially if you still controlled the area.
Yeah. Yeah, that's highway with caveat, right? If you still control what purports to be border security and the rule of law, then a highway would be massive. But these guys already control generals and colonels, and they're paying off the right people. Let's get to it. All right. And it's an excellent point. As a result of all these combined factors, it does not look like anyone is going to build a road traversing the gap anytime soon, and yet that does not stop thousands upon thousands of people from braving the gap, sometimes without their own consent, each and every year. So our question is, why? We're going to pause for a word from our sponsors, and then we'll dive in. And we've returned. Please be well aware, yet unafraid, the following may not be appropriate for all our fellow listeners. Here's where it gets crazy. The short answer, for the vast majority of people who are temporarily populating the gap, is simply this: migration. According to the United Nations, an estimated 800,000 people, including children and adolescents, crossed through this area or attempted to do so in 2024. They did so on foot. They had very little in the way of access to food, water, shelter, or safety.
And that also includes a lot of women who are imminently going to give birth to young children.
Yeah, and they're coming from countries like Ecuador, Brazil, Peru, Venezuela, other South American countries are in the mix. But you'll find folks from even Haiti or Ethiopia or the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, China even, Cameroon, India, and Pakistan. Again, all mixed in with these South American countries.
And this is theoretically because it's easier to get into, like, from those other places that would seem a bit more far-flung, to get into a South American country and move their way towards the gap?
Yeah, you've anticipated this. I love that we're pointing this out. So think about it this way. If you're looking at the map still and you're saying, hey, why would you come from a place as far away as South Asia or China and go this way? In the example of China, I don't want to tell too many tales out of school here. You can fly to Ecuador visa free. And once you get to Ecuador, then the rule of law is a little more porous, as are the borders. So it becomes easier to traverse over land. Most people who have an alternative way of attempting to get to the United States, and again, most of these people migrating are trying to get to the US. They're not trying to get to Guate and stay there or something. They're trying to reach Uncle Sam. And when they're doing this, they're forced to travel through the Gap because it's their last choice. It's the one they can afford to do. Otherwise, why would you not take a boat? Why would you not try to get a plane, right? Mm-hmm. And the U.S. Coast Guard, like part of, Noel, you just mentioned Haiti. Haiti, it feels like you're doubling back, right? You're going south to get north in some way, right?
Bit of an ass around elbow situation.
And that's because entities like the U.S. Coast Guard are spotting and stopping boats. And they've got a pretty crazy track record of doing so. So your odds of getting to the U.S. are actually improved if you go out of your way and go through this land route.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. If you look at the larger map, especially if you're coming in from the Atlantic side or in the Caribbean, like you can just see how the routes could be easily patrolled, and then Panama's cozy, relationship with the U.S. and through via the canal and all that stuff. You can see why you wouldn't go straight to Panama or Costa Rica or Nicaragua. Even you would go the other route,
or try your luck in the Gulf of America. I can't remember what we're supposed to call it.
Only part of it. Apparently, there's still a portion of it that's the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay. Right on.
Google
Everything's
Maps
fine.
Still says Gulf of Mexico.
No, did you not see? There's some dude that came out and was railing on Google Maps and for not correcting it yet. But apparently, it's also like it's not required. It's only like a proposal of some kinds, and they have 35 days or something to enact it or to replace it on government sanctioned maps and things like that.
Also, check out our earlier episode on textbooks and maritime borders. I know we've discussed this, but look to East Asia and see what each different country in that region decides to call the bodies of water next to them. Mm-hmm. Spoiler, they don't agree. This is disturbing because a place that governments and corporations for centuries have deemed an impossible HQ point or transit route has become a superhighway of sorts, right? Or a big path for people who are fleeing disaster in their home communities. And the fastest growing portion of these migrants, I think the one that really, really bothers us, it's children. It's children under the age of 5. They're the fastest growing demographic of people migrating as a last resort through the Gap.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, a fifth of the at least according to the official numbers, and we'll see why those are tricky. A fifth of the people migrating are children, adolescents. Part of the reason why the fastest growing documented demographic is children under 5 is to that earlier point, because they're expectant mothers who not infrequently will give birth in transit.
Yeah, and I think this might be a good time to talk about asylum seekers versus refugees. And I know that, it's certainly an issue that comes up every time there's a new president. If I'm not mistaken, one of the executive orders that was signed on day one had something to do with making it much more difficult, if not completely cutting off asylum seekers. Essentially, I believe it shut the system down temporarily.
Yeah. A lot of stuff here as we record on Friday, January 24th, 2025 in the United States. A lot of stuff is like a shoe hanging in the balance. Things have been put on pause. Courts are deciding what gets to be permanent. In recent decades, migration has been what we call a hot button issue in the United States. Recent moves by the last few presidential administrations have sought to close access to the country by various means. And sometimes that means they are creating new restrictions on who can get a visa, who needs a visa, how long that visa applies, or they're returning to older policies with higher barriers to legal entry. And that's, I appreciate you pointing out the concept of asylum and refugee status. It's worth our time, right? Just to break down the difference here.
It's something that I think I've always been a little tenuous about myself.
All right. The difference really depends upon where you're at. To qualify in the United States for either asylum or refugee status, you have to prove to Uncle Sam that you are going to be persecuted or maybe even murdered based on your race, religion, nationality, your political activity, or what they loosely call State Department loosely calls membership in a particular social group. And that's sort of their miscellaneous umbrella term, right? So that can include LGBTQ, that could include an activist group like a Falun Gong. There's a big Venn diagram there. And the big difference there is that you ask for asylum when you get to the border or when you are already in the country. And legally, right now, again, a lot of things are on pause. We don't know if this will be true in a few months, but legally right now, you have a year to request asylum once you reach the United States. There are exceptions like Cuba, but that's the by and large.
And just to clarify what I mentioned earlier, one of those executive orders indefinitely suspended the ability for individuals to legally seek asylum. And apparently it's quite unprecedented. This has been part of the United States law since the 80s.
Yeah, so again, it'll go to the courts, right?
That's
That reminds me of another sticky wicket, the idea of removing the constitutionally guaranteed concept of citizenship by birth. That's going to be an absolute minefield. To return to what we're saying, the difference with asylum and refugee status is where you're at. If you are requesting refugee status, you can do so outside of the United States. You do not have to be in your origin country. All you have to prove is that you are unable or unwilling to return to your country of origin because of one of those 5 loose categories we outlined earlier. Unfortunately, as we know, it's very difficult to get that kind of status, asylum or refugee status. And guys, I don't want to sound too cynical, but from what I'm seeing, people often have the highest chance of meeting success if something about their country or their identity is in the news cycle, or if there's a larger geopolitical move, or if, God willing, they get help from an NGO.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Specifically, I'm thinking about Venezuelan refugees and, thinking about the news cycle and everything that was occurring in Venezuela over the past, I don't even know how many years at this point, but where that was a big deal to allow in a lot of people from that country because of the chaos that was occurring, in the country, but also in the news.
Yeah. So the public is reacting. The politicians are reacting as a result, right? There's a feedback loop. And now all of a sudden, until the next headline breaks, people care. And with that, since we're mentioning executive orders, what do you think? Want to get some primary source on that one?
Well, yeah, let's jump to the executive order that Noel mentioned, because this just came forward on January 20th, and we're recording this on the 24th, and it goes into effect on January 27th. So, I mean, it's just crazy how fast an executive order like this can, be ordered, and then some
Executed.
action can take place. Yeah, exactly. This is titled, you can find it right now, Realigning the United States Refugee Admissions Program. And that is specifically the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, known as USRAP. It is hereby, according to the newly inaugurated president, suspended starting January 27th. It says, quote, I therefore direct that entry into the United States of refugees under the USRAP be suspended. So, I guess
Yeah, it's a tense time because it has to go to the courts, right? It's tough. People are going to fight it, but the question becomes a question of, as boring as it is to say, it becomes a question of procedure, because the minute that kicks in on the 27th, people or agencies aren't going to wait for the courts. You know, you can't tell somebody, okay, you're applying for this status. Here, kick it in the lobby. You know, we got some Popular Mechanics magazines from 2012. If you want to just scroll through those, and we'll
Reader's Digest.
Yeah, we'll tell you what SCOTUS says. You know,
it really reminds me of our earlier episodes where we talked about the powers that the executive branch received post 9/11, and just this concept of how you can use an executive order, the way an executive order is executed, and how all of that changed as power started to go away from, Congress and the lawmakers, the legislature, to the presidential seat.
Yes, the problem with this is a non-American perspective, but I've heard it more than once. The problem with all three branches of the United States government, we're not counting the media just yet, but they are the fourth estate. The issue there is that all three of those groups are expansionist inherently. Sure. Power begets power, and power likes seeking out more power.
And they're supposed to all say, hey, we got enough power each. We're cool.
Yeah, they're supposed to check and balance.
That's how that works.
Yeah. That's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, but who even balances a checkbook these days, right? So everybody's just going ham on their thing. We are going to make this a two-parter. Before we do, I believe there is one concept that we need to put in mind here as we get closer to traveling the gap, and it is this. You have to note that there are differing administrations and different branches of government that have contradictory policies on the concept of immigration, but at the same time, if one is being intellectually honest, we must admit that these crackdowns go across the political and ideological board. The recent Biden administration did something that Gollum from Tolkien would call tricksy. They spent a lot of time, not super duper in the headlines, not talking to the U.S. public. They would go to governments, Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama, Honduras, Ecuador, places that were associated with this swell in migration, and they would say, hey guys, you're in our backyard. We need you to change the laws. We're not going to necessarily change our stuff. We need you to do it. And this is meant to prevent migration from Brazil, Colombia, Cuba, Ecuador, Haiti, Venezuela, of course. And this is where we get to folks like Yael Schachter, who is a director for the Americas and Europe at Refugees International. Guy who knows what he's talking about. He was speaking with the Progressive magazine in 2022, and he says, when I've talked to the Biden administration about the pressure they're putting on these adjacent countries, he says, what's a little frustrating is they typically say, these are not our policies. These are the policies of other governments.
Well, sure. It's like a buffer kind of, right?
It's like a bait and switch.
Totally.
Well, in all of those countries we talked about there, again, going back to Venezuela, Haiti, Ecuador, Cuba, Colombia, these are places that are experiencing tremendous changes, right? Detrimental changes due to often activities of criminals, of people who are on the other side of the law, people who are seeking to overthrow governments. Sure. So there are a lot of citizens attempting to go other places. And it is tricksy is such a good way to describe it, Ben.
Well, okay, to take it microcosmic, and I appreciate that, Matt, to take it microcosmic, if you have kids or if you've interacted, parent, family, kid groups, then you have maybe encountered at some point a parent or an authority figure who sort of forces a decision on a kid and then wants the kid to pretend like it was their decision.
Great.
And that's sort of what that's sort of what the U.S. is doing. They're saying, oh gosh, oh geez, guys, it's not us. It's these other folks. These are sovereign nations. It's their decision. They're doing what they want. And it just happens to be exactly what we told them to do.
And also, everybody just stay where you are, is what they're saying.
Yeah. And let's also point out, because I know politics can be very sensitive anytime, but especially these days, these policy changes did not begin with the Biden administration. They began during the Obama administration.
Yep. How easily folks forget some of the nefarious things that the Obama administration was responsible for.
Yeah, man, it goes back to that. It makes me feel things differently, guys. We've mentioned it before on the show. Just this concept of the United States having open arms and saying, give us your tired, your poor, your huddled masses. Like,
Emma Lazarus.
Come to us. We have opportunity. But really, even then, way before then, they're just saying, we need cheap labor. Give us your cheap labor. Because we have industry and we need human bodies to throw at it.
Masquerading as the American dream.
Yeah, right. Not what you say, but how you say it. Yeah. Since we're quoting poetry there, it's pretty awesome poetry, by the way. Check out that Emma Lazarus poem. It is worth your time. We've got to say this. These are hidden hand policies. The U.S. administrations were not being entirely transparent with the U.S. public and indeed with the global public. So, Dylan, if we can we get a little womp womp? Because they earned it. Perfect. There it is. And look, when these, we'll call them hidden hand policies, when they were enacted, they did not stop what they were purporting to stop, just like Nixon and the war on drugs or the war on crime. They didn't prevent migration from other countries. Instead, they shifted it. They shifted the means of migration to other routes. No one solved the problem. They just moved it.
Little sleight of hand there. This is why you'll find various experts and analysts who argue that the U.S. has for years not been addressing migration as an issue, but simply kind of kicking the can further down the road, effectively pushing their own border further south.
Yeah. Think of it like a house on fire. We all know that cutesy meme with the dog saying, this is fine.
It's all fine. Everything's good.
Yeah. You find a house on fire, and instead of putting out the fire, the people in power, for a panoply of reasons, on all sides of political aisles, they effectively just moved the fire to a different house in a different neighborhood and said, yeah, okay, all good, vote for us again. But people were still burning as a result. Is that too hyperbolic?
I don't think so.
No?
I'm just trying to figure out how you move that fire without putting it out.
I know, right? Wait, is the technology there? So our next question is going to be, why Darien Gap? We've shared a lot of context and history in this, but this is clearly going to be a series. So we're going to pause it here, and we hope you tune in for our very next episode, which will be traveling into the Gap. In the meantime, thank you so much for tuning in, folks. We hope this message finds you well and safe in a mid-grand consensual adventure. We want to hear your thoughts. Have you traversed the Gap, or do you know anyone who has done so? What do you wish more people understood about the current state of migration today, not just in the West, but in the world overall? Tell us your thoughts. We're here with you, and we can't wait to hear from you. You can find us via email. You can call us on a telephonic device. You can even hit up the internets and talk to us on those lines.
Boy, can you ever. You can find us at the handle Conspiracy Stuff, where we exist on Facebook with our Facebook group, Here's Where It Gets Crazy, on YouTube, where we have oodles of video content for you to enjoy, and on XFKA Twitter. On Instagram and TikTok, however, we are Conspiracy Stuff Show, and we're also human people that you can find separately. I am at How Now Noel Brown on Instagram. Ben Boland, how about you, sir?
Should one choose, you can find accounts calling themselves at Ben Boland wherever you find things that have an at in the front of them.
Glad you locked that down, buddy.
Whoa. My name is Matt Frederick, spelled just like Kevin Frederick. You know who that is, I'm sure.
I don't know who Kevin Frederick is.
He's a very, very funny comedian.
Okay. Oh, I'll have to check him out.
Yeah, you can find me there. We do have a phone number. It is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you call in, you've got 3 minutes to leave a voicemail. Within that voicemail, please give yourself a cool nickname and let us know if we can use your name and message on the air. If you've got more to say than can fit in 3 minutes, why not instead send us a good old-fashioned email? We are
the entities who read every piece of correspondence we receive and love to hear from you. We can all see this. We can all respond. Thank you for the very nice letter from a philosophy grad student who complimented us on a video we made a while ago, which was frankly harrowing. We want to read your suggestions for future episodes. We want to read your responses. We want to see pictures of your pets. Tell us about your adventures. Tell us if we can share your name. If you want a moniker, we're super down with that. If you prefer anonymity but have something your fellow listeners need to learn, we've got your 6 as well. Join us out here in the dark. Conspiracy at iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.